Harry Belafonte.
Thank you so much for such a warm reception. I'm glad you enjoyed the film. Does anybody have any questions?
It's a little hard to see hands from here, so forgive us if we miss you at first. Don't see any hands.
Did the film just answer your question?
Yes, please.
Hi. You obviously on purpose left out John F. Kennedy's assassination. Was there a reason or just?
You know, I've never been asked that question.
Question?
Well, there's a lot. The question, absolutely, I will do that. The question was that she had noticed that we had left out John F. Kennedy's assassination and if there had been a reason for that. No. No reason. I don't think it really occurred to us to document that. I think that's something that most people know about. And while you know about the assassination of Martin and Bobby, I think their relationship to Harry was a little closer and a little bit more in time with the movement that he was working on, and their assassinations were so close together. But there's a lot of history we've left out of this film because we only have so much time to cover so much time. And, you know, Harry was very specific about the kind of story he wanted to tell and what he felt was important to motivate and inspire people. And so we had to trim a lot of very intimate and close stories of his own from the picture so that we could tell the stories that we did.
Great. There's a hand here, please. Yes.
How did the making of this film impact your relationship with your father?
The question is, how did this film impact my relationship with my father? I'm smiling because it impacted it in many different ways. We went through a lot of challenges through the process. My father is not a very Neptunistic person, so
What does that mean?
he's not one to sort of gush over his children and encourage, you know, tell everybody how amazing they are, you know, we are. And we know that he feels that about us some of the time. So there were some challenges along the way for me in shooting the film because of the way certain people perceived me, and while I was a working professional, when there would be challenges or things that would come up, a lot of the time it was difficult for me to go to my father, who was one of the executive producers of the film, because it looked too much like I was running to daddy. So there were issues that came up often, and he would get frustrated with me that I didn't come to him, but you know, it was a very interesting dynamic. Our relationship is very close. We were very close before the film started, and we're even more close now. We have we're very good working partners. We're working on 2 other projects currently. But you know, there were certain challenges that I had to go through, because after all, he is my dad, and I also had to convince him a lot of the time and remind him that he was who he was, because he didn't want the film to be, oh, look at me and look how incredible I am and look at all the wonderful things that I've done. And I had to sort of remind him sometimes that he had to look at himself and look at all the incredible things that he'd done. Because he kept wanting to veer off into someone else's story, or to veer off into something that was deeply personal to him politically, that wasn't necessarily relevant to the path of the story that we were telling. So there were challenges, but we're all the better for it.
There's a few hands here now. Why don't we start this direction and move this way? Sir, please.
How did your dad make it onto the Ed Sullivan show in the era of the blacklist?
The question is, how did my father end up on the Ed Sullivan show in the era of the blacklist? I'll answer your question kind of generally, and then I will encourage you, and you just said this to me, but I will encourage you to buy his book that just came out yesterday. in his book called My Song, that has just been published by Knopf, that came out yesterday, goes into very deep detail of all of the stories that are on the screen and more. Well, my father was scheduled to go on actually the show when Ed Sullivan actually called him to his apartment and had a conversation with him and asked my father about why he wouldn't talk about other people and why he wouldn't snitch, so to speak. And my father, and actually confronted my father about being a member of the Communist Party. And my father told him that while he did participate in certain meetings where there were communist people, that he was not himself a member of the Communist Party, but that there were many of the beliefs of the communist regime that he sympathized with, given the plight of poor and black people and people of color in the United States, but that he was not going to compromise his position and he was not going to talk about anything. And if that was a problem, then that was a problem. And he left there, and he was supposed to go on that night. And he left there, and then he got a call from his publicist saying that you, in fact, will be on the show tonight. So I guess Ed Sullivan just had enough of it himself, because he felt that talent was talent, and he wanted to have my father perform. So that's sort of like the general overview, but in the book, it goes through quite a bit of detail about that meeting and the conversation that took place. And it also talks about some of the men and women that were his peers that were blacklisted, and some of the people that he continued to work with while they were on the blacklist, just under other names, and using other people that were not blacklisted and using their names. So there are a lot of publications out during that period that have the names of people who were not blacklisted, but were in fact written by people who were, so that they could be employed.
Yes, please, sir.
What other projects are you working on?
What are the other projects we're working on? Well, we are working on another documentary which we're hoping to be the answer to What Do You Do Now? It's called Another Night in the Free World. And we're taking a look at all of the different uprisings globally that are happening and currently, and all of the different movements that are happening, and a lot of the youth movements that are burgeoning out of the problems with our economics, and we're hopefully answering to that. As well as we're doing a on-ground cultural project with the SCIU, which is the Service Employees International Union, and the local 1199 that services the caregivers and nurses and janitorial staff of hospitals in the United States. And we're doing a theatrical and musical cultural project with the union.
Yes, please.
When you were growing up, did your father or your family ever receive any death threats?
The question is, when I was growing up, did my father or my family receive any death threats? It's interesting. I was asked that question today, earlier on the radio, and while I can't confirm that there were actual death threats, I was present for bomb scares on planes when we had to come off. Our phones were tapped. I used to sit in the audience and watch my father's show, and then all of a sudden sort of start looking around to see if there were any snipers in the audience. My siblings and I were very aware of what was happening to the people around us and the people's lives that were being lost around us, and the challenges and the conflicts that the people that would come to our house to gather for meetings were facing. And my parents did their best to try and shield us from fear. So I wasn't privy to any actual death threats, but I was about to get on a plane, and we all had to get off when I was a kid because of the bomb scare. But there was a lot of action all the time, and Secret Service issues and fears and paranoia and all that.
Yes, please.
You have a fair bit of old footage. How challenging was it obtaining all that old archival footage?
The question was that there's a fair bit of archival footage and what was the challenge of obtaining it. We had an amazing, amazing researcher, Helen Weiss, who, if any of you are filmmakers and you need footage, look her up. She is incredible, the way in which she finds material, not only material that we know that is kind of obvious where you can go to the Library of Congress or fair use, or things that we can buy from Corbis or things like that, archival houses that already currently exist, but she was able to go into dusty attics and moldy basements and find footage of the civil rights movement and of even our own archive in our own, we have a sort of a warehouse of stuff that was my father's from a long time ago, and she was able to find a lot of really amazing stuff and stuff that's not even in the film. The challenge was not only finding it, but paying for it all. It was very, very expensive because some of the stuff had to be transferred and had to be sort of touched up. But my father sat down with Susanne Rostock and told his entire story over and over and over again. And through telling the story and really getting out of him what we felt were the key important points that he wanted to make, we then supported those stories and found footage to support the stories. And a lot of pie.
Yes, please.
I'm not sure if I missed it, but is Julie your mother?
Yes, Julie is my mother.
Well, you know what? Watching a lot of that footage, to me, she's really a hero.
To me too.
Yeah, it's like there was some glue there for him. I mean, I'm just supposing this, and she would pop up in pictures every now and again. And was she as quiet as she seemed? I mean, I just sort of felt a real force from her.
Buy the book. She was a huge force. She was a very independent woman when their relationship started. My mother was the only white member of an all-black dance company. She was a very courageous woman. She was a very artistic woman. She's still alive. She's very articulate. And actually, when they split up at 79 and 80 years old, my mother became a documentary filmmaker in her own right, and she sort of reinvented herself, and she's an incredible force. What she says in the film in terms of their relationship is true. There's so many things that held their relationship together. It was not just an attraction physically or sexually or emotionally, but politically they were really on the same page. They had a very dynamic way of supporting each other through the movement. My mother had her own set. The other thing that happened, by the way, in the 70s was like Bella Abzug and a lot of political campaigns. And after the wins of the civil rights movement, both my parents really supported a lot of the young men and women that became and still are some of our congressmen and women and some of our elected officials. And different political campaigns was really what sort of continued. And my parents worked very hard together, and my mother did a lot on her own and still does.
I hope she writes a book.
She is actually, but her book is before she met my father. A lot happened before. She dated Marlon Brando on and off for about 9 years.
We have time for one more question.
And then we'll just all have to go for coffee.
I'm just curious, what came first, your father's book or your movie? Or was the movie prompting him to write the book?
Oh, the movie came first. The movie was close to in the can and final cut, and he began the book. Yeah.
I do have a
follow up then. For people being able to see this film, is there distribution in place, broadcast dates? What do you expect?
Well, HBO has bought the film and it will start airing on HBO on Monday the 17th at 10 o'clock, which is very soon. And for those of you who don't have HBO, you can watch it on HBO Go, which I think is on the internet. And in terms of being in theaters, we do not have distribution in theaters traditionally yet. we're looking for that potentially, but we're also looking to release it on our own. We want to get on college campuses. We want to get as many DVDs as we can together for high schools. We want to put a teaching curriculum together. And we're hoping that this gets up to Thank you again to Vancouver and the Film Festival, and thank you all for being such a great audience.